Greetings, humans. Zach here, welcoming you to another book discussion with Sequestered Superlative. Every week we get together and talk about what it is we've been reading the week prior, how we feel about it, and how many times it did or didn't blow our minds. Current book calendar, upcoming reading, book discussion dates, and more can be found at sequesteredsuperlative.com. Enjoy the show. Alright, here we go. This is the last discussion, number 4, for 12 Rules for Life by Jordan Peterson. Some of the points we cover are anti-human subconscious tendencies, changing systems via changing people, how to turn dragons into squirrels, and what the hell to do with a pen of light. Join us next week for our first discussion about Island by Aldous Huxley. I think it's interesting that we have the phenomena of people observing that Peterson's main audience is like young white males, and a lot of this book is geared towards probably middle-aged people. I feel like a lot of the parenting chapters and stuff like that, obviously it's universally applicable and a lesson you should probably learn before you become a parent, but a lot of it is parenting geared.
Yeah.
I just think that in general, in our current society, the people that are the most likely to be needing this kind of thing are just young males.
Yeah, and I think he does a good job kind of explaining that through, I think it's chapter 11. A couple of these chapters, he talks a lot about all of the social constructionist viewpoints and stuff, and how that's detrimental to society and the foundations that it comes from,
Right.
which kind of ties into that.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the skateboarding chapter.
Yeah, that's the 11. One thing that really struck me reading this is that a lot of people that are against or opposed or disagree with Peterson's stuff, not that anyone should agree with everything he says, but people that are vehemently or obviously entirely against his messages, they often, I wonder how much of the opposition is subconscious bias, or I don't know how to say that, because he goes through in here and he talks about what he was talking about, a distillation of one of Jung's theories, or Freud, or whoever, to do the psychoanalytical tool where you analyze the result and basically retro engineer the motivation by the consequence. And he is all about talking about neo-Marxists and left-wing radicals and all these things, whereas we get these pretty reasonable people who have these viewpoints who he's describing this way. And a lot of the time, so the example he gives about them installing the things to block kids skateboarding at the college, right? So he takes the result of that, which is this utilitarian, not beautiful, he describes it as anti-life or anti-beauty. That's the result of doing that down the road. So he looks back and he says, well, we can obviously see at work some sort of anti-life, or I can't remember the exact words he uses, but this whole mentality that went into instituting these regulations that resulted in these things getting installed. I wonder how much there's a person sitting there who's fuck everything, I'm gonna fuck these kids up skateboarding, or if it's just a natural, maybe not natural, but it's just a causal trickle down of the combined cultural thoughts we've been having and evolution that have been taking place, well, all throughout history, but up till now and recently, if that's just the spit out of that. And so arguing with individuals seems it's very prone to be super volatile, and individuals have probably a lot of reasonable disagreement with the accusations that he makes to individuals, right? Because these people maybe aren't neo-Marxist or radicals, but they hold these viewpoints that are just intrinsically part of those systems of thought, So it's like this weird dichotomy where you have these individuals who think they may actually think they're doing good things, but he kind of touches on this a little bit where he's like these things are below, like they're subconscious, they're like systems at work that are environmental programming and whatever it may be, where you have this weird dichotomy between the systems and the individuals, and it's like hard to address a proper like method or pathway to uh, fix things or start discussions because of that dichotomy.
Yeah, I definitely think that a lot of the opposition to what Peterson is saying, coming from a lot of people, is, and I've had other thoughts on this for a while now, but like the world, at least in terms of political stuff, is moving towards non-aggression. And I don't mean that because it's like obviously there's still wars, but it's like the most peaceful time there's ever been in terms of overall like global conflicts and everything. So, and along with like the increasing divide between people on the left and people on the right, I feel like the reason instead of having the reason they're going to these jumping to making just a rule and stating a rule that destroys the ability for individuals to live basically is because they no longer see the conflict that comes from individuals disagreeing as not necessarily worth it, but it's just like if you're going to it's like you see so many people labeled as Nazis, but then the question becomes, well, what's the good of having discourse with a Nazi? They're Nazis, and it becomes more about like um, the morality of thoughts as opposed to the sort of I guess the use of that, like what they're meant, like because obviously everything is meant to be good or beneficial in some respect. It's just now instead of it being good or beneficial in a way that can be wrong, the things that it's good or beneficial to are the things that are bad, and so they have to it people take it more as a personal attack when you disagree with them because now they've labeled anything that isn't beneficial to them but is beneficial to someone else as sort of an action, like as more of an attack. So why why not just attack it in the most effective way possible, which is make it illegal? It's like
Um,
if when the individual's ideas are no longer um, sort of taken as just ideas, it's like why shouldn't the kids be able to skate there? You know, so it's like instead of talking to them and saying, "Hey, it's dangerous" or something, it's like let's just outlaw it because talking to them isn't worth it.
yeah. I, to me, like the specific example, like if we just want to use that to break it
Well,
down.
I meant more like with that in reference to like the political stuff. Now, for
Sure.
like this individual example, I mean, kids aren't going to listen, obviously, but at the same time,
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, I mean, I think we've there's a lot that you guys just said. I think that the main I think that there are only a few possible points of criticism to Peterson that are um, like available. I think that a large number of people have kind of a knee-jerk reaction where they don't really know anything about him, but they know that other people have said that he's against what they like, and so they just they haven't looked at any of the things that he's saying, and they're just saying, oh well, yeah, he's a men's rights activist, Nazi, etc. And I think those people are just uninformed. Um, I think that there probably are some arguments. I think a lot of the things he says is sort of like built upon a lot of the philosophy and a lot of the science stuff that he quotes. And I don't actually know like the validity of all of that. I assume that most of what he's saying is pretty much like considered to be correct. but I don't know. Like, it'd be interesting to hear from like the scientific community in general, and like I'm pretty sure that the big five, you know, traits are widely considered to be the best, like, you know, the best way to look at personality. Um, but I mean, I'm pretty sure that I would imagine that there are intelligent people that would differ on their opinion of the science of some of the stuff that he says. But it does seem, everything he says to me does seem to make sense. So I don't know. I think most people don't like him for a more of a political reason, and they're just not allowed to like him because it goes against the ideas that they have. And I think that a lot of people are more concerned with their ideas being right than they are like the idea that they currently have being correct than they are with having the most correct idea.
Yeah.
So I don't know. But then again, like I also think that like I don't know if kids should be allowed to skateboard on public property, like, and things like that. Like, I mean, I think it's a complicated issue, but I think that like, I mean, if I build this, and it is a little bit authoritarian, I guess, to say that if I build a statue and I don't want people to skateboard on it, then they shouldn't. So like, I mean, I think you have to admit that it is like it is controlling,
Sure.
but I don't know. I don't know if that means people should do it, but I don't know if that I don't know that that example particularly matters.
Yeah. I think it was useful to lay out the argument, but aside from that, you know.
Yeah, I mean, it's a weird. I don't think you should stop people from playing on playgrounds. I don't think you should stop people from skateboarding at all. I don't know if they should be skateboarding on my property.
Yeah.
You know? I mean, it's
I think that's like an interesting thing to like introduce into looking at some of the subject matter is like bureaucracy and like all its forms that we like live with because we have like these, you
yeah,
know, giant systems that are essentially like organisms. You know, we have like the American legal system or the Canadian legal system, and it's like this big fucking like living thing that's evolving and it's got its own thoughts and opinions and it's like, you know, it's like this crazy dynamic where you not only get like the potential for either craziness or rationality or whatever from like the individuals involved and like instigate or like implementing parts of the system, but you also get the system itself which dictates to them and to like the other systems around it, like, and in conjunction with the other systems around it, like
yeah,
other things. And so you get this, like, that's what I was kind of saying with like earlier that there's this weird dichotomy. We have like these huge systems, whether it be like cultural, you know, thought process on sexual freedom, or whether it's like our legal dictates on like child safety. But the dichotomy between that and like individuals' opinions and individuals, like, even if they're like well regarded, like high status people whose like opinion is probably valid, they still have to contend or like conjoin themselves with these systems. And you get this weird kind of like odd defensive plateau where people can get up on these like places and you try and criticize them and it's like it just like slides over them and bounces off the huge system.
yeah. I mean, I think a lot of it has to do with like the way people build up their identities. Um, I mean, I'm sure that there are things that I believe that could be incorrect, and if somebody was challenging me on them, then like I might feel like I was attacked. I feel like I try to be as conscious of those sort of things as possible
Yeah,
and willing to. I don't know if there are any ideas that I hold on such high a pedestal that, like, with an appropriate argument, I wouldn't like at least admit that there's some nuance to it.
sure.
But like, I feel like there are some people that are much more closed-minded and much more like I don't know. It's weird. Like I just think that there are some people that aren't willing to budge at all, and like the you wanting to have a conversation about it at all is like that in itself is an attack.
Yeah, which is like his entire railing against ideologues. Like
Yeah,
that's part and
and a lot of
parcel.
the ideas are so complicated and so like it's so strange to what more normal people are like uh used to that I think a lot of even a lot of these particularly left wing ideas really need like deep conversation and deep like understanding of like the other side, you know? Like, I mean, the just the way, like, just the, um, you know, you could even look at something like, uh, you know, homosexuality or the trans situation, and all
Hashtag.
that. And like, those are extremely complicated issues. And if it's something, but it affects such a tiny, you know, population of people that the average person, like, it just sounds crazy.
Yeah, sure.
And it takes slow conversation, and it takes like questioning, and it takes like you have to slowly learn that your current idea could be wrong, and like what someone else's idea is. And like I don't know, I just think that like having those conversations is really the only way to understand it at all.
Yeah, absolutely.
Whereas it seems like a lot of the time on both sides, we just want somebody to be like, we want them to shut up and just accept our version of the way things are without all of those like reasons. Um, so I don't know. I just think you have to be like really open minded and try to go into these things and like not knowing anything and asking questions. But I think the other side has to be willing to like understand that you just don't know what you're talking about and you need to learn. But I feel like that's so hard to do on both sides. So I don't know. I don't know. I think that most people probably want like to do good, and they want to be happy, and they want other people to be happy. But at the same time, like there are just bad ideas, and some of them seem good, and they're just not. And I think
Yeah.
I think a lot of the things that this book is sort of showing is that a lot of the time the easy ideas aren't the good ones.
Yeah, it's like there's a whole host of things that are like seemingly innocuous, but in reality, like those are the things that ruin everything.
Yeah, I mean there are a lot of uncomfortable truths that I think like we layer on all these lies and all these untruths, and we hide the truths, and then we're working with this like machine of like lies that we've created, and like it just doesn't, like there's something fundamentally wrong with it. And I think that's kind of what he's talking about in the rule 9, the first chapter, where like, or not 9, route 10, um when
Yeah, I
he's
realized we
talking,
totally started on 11. Oops.
um where he's talking about how you need to be precise in your speech, because like I feel like a lot of the time anytime we have like a political conversation, we're not we're not talking about, like we're talking about the higher layers of the actual thing, or like we're talking about the bits and pieces of it, when we're really trying to have like another conversation. Like the argument about abortion like isn't really about abortion, it's about sex, it's about religion, it's about like so many other things, and like
Right.
every issue is like that.
Yeah.
And we're not being precise in our speech anytime we have any of these political debates, for the most part, because we're we're ignoring the tiny bits and pieces that really need to be hashed out. um, and we're working with this like amalgamation of assumptions, I feel like, a lot of the time.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, I'm sure both of you have like tons of experience with like the destructive and hurtful power of expectation, where like you
Yeah.
have an infinite number of expectations for connected to everyone and yourself, and then that same thing back to you from everyone around you, and it's like the potential, it's like a constant minefield we're walking through, and like very likely several times a day we step on like mines, maybe like several at a time, whether that's like internally inside ourselves, or in someone else's minefield, or and that just and sometimes it sets off chain reactions and stuff, and a lot of that is because we are. I know for me, like I'm terrified of the broaching of like to start discussing like one of those expectations. It opens the playing field to the unknown conversations about the entire minefield. So it's
Mm.
like, it's just like this like horrifying, like once I start down this path, then it turns from a path into the minefield and we gotta like dig up some shit. But the result of that is that we dig up the mines and then we can navigate this like field with some holes in it and not like get blown up, but maybe trip a couple times.
Right. I mean,
Yeah.
I thought this chapter was incredible, like
Yeah.
probably my favorite. Um, and like one of the things he says is that when we look at the world, we perceive only what is enough for our plans and actions to work for to get us by.
Hmm.
And I don't know exactly where it is, but he talks about how if you see a hole in the floor, you don't really think about a hole in the floor. You think like that's something I could fall into.
Yeah.
Or when you think of your car, you really don't think about it at all. You think about like this gets me to point A to point B. And there's also other things like, maybe you think it makes you really cool and all that. Like there are certain things that it does for you, but you don't think about like the individual pieces until they break.
Right.
Um, and then I just thought that was really interesting because like you really just don't like you don't think about any of this stuff until it stops working, and then you have like these little crises, and
Yeah.
that's really interesting.
Honestly, like, just he was like 100% right, and it's one of those things. Especially with I liked how it was like the car is an extension of you when it's like not working, I guess. So it's
Mm-hmm.
like it's more worrying because I thought that was like a neat little metaphor.
Yeah, that is a really interesting sort of concept. Like we do consider our things and our like belongings, and like when we're driving a car, we are the car, and like to some extent, like we are all of our stuff. And that's kind of an interesting. I think that might be why I tend to find some value in like more of a minimalist um, sort of uh, lifestyle when it comes to owning a bunch of things, because I've always sort of felt like the more things I have and the more things I have to keep track of and the more things I have to like do are like it kind of stresses me out, or it just adds things to think about. But it's kind of a tangent. But he's absolutely right. Like when you use a screwdriver, you don't really think that like you are the you just think that you have like you're part of the screwdriver, that you can do anything. It's an extension of you.
Only think there is no spoon. There is only you.
Yeah.
I really like the cat turning into the dragon. I think I've heard that before, like at some point in my life, but it was cool to hear him write out the story and like talk about
Yeah.
how
Right.
things just
Yeah.
grow like exponentially and turn into like these massive resentments and like stop life from happening.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I thought that was like extremely powerful. The whole concept with the relationships
Hmm.
and how like, you'll be like, I hate my wife, but like that's not really it. You hate like all the little things that have piled up.
Sure. Yeah.
And like when you don't talk about a problem, like it doesn't go away, it gets bigger. And so like the sooner you can take care of those things, the better. But like it's hard. It's going to be hard because half the time, like I feel like, especially like in relationships, if something the other person is doing is annoying you, it's because of your own insecurity.
Right. And he's talking
And
about
so
like,
like, you have to face that.
yeah. I like towards the end where he's like, the only thing we have to do to make sure all these bad things happen is don't do things. Like don't notice, don't react, don't
Yeah.
attend, don't discuss, don't consider, don't work for peace, don't take responsibility. And then like bam, dragons.
Yeah. I mean, I think he says somewhere like the only thing worse than like the actual situation is ignoring it and waiting. Like, like if something is broken, like you have to fix it at some point, like
Yeah.
most likely. if you don't have to fix it at some point, then it may not actually be an issue and you can just like forget about it. But that's different. If you let it go for too long, you usually have to still fix it, or like you have to like cut it out entirely, and that's way more painful. It's
Yeah.
probably like having an infection or like a wound, you know?
Don't put that eagle on me, Ricky Bobby.
He's like, sometimes it's a squirrel, but sometimes it's not. But like, you want to know, like, you need to know.
Dude, that was so great. He's like, sometimes it's a squirrel, but if you don't look at it, it's a dragon and 7 lions. And I know a person that's been chased by a squirrel.
Led by an alligator.
Yeah.
Jesus Christ.
I like it, the last sentence of that. He's like, and I know someone who was chased by a squirrel. You're like, I
That's
was
funny.
cracking up.
Yeah.
This chapter made me laugh and like face palm. The last chapter made me cry, and the one in between was like, no,
Yeah.
like huge emotional response.
Yeah, I haven't read the last chapter, so I'm just gonna hop out when we start talking about it.
No, you can be here, dude.
I don't want to. I don't want to spoil it.
Yeah, I
Um,
didn't. I felt like 10 was like the true like culmination of the book.
Yeah.
Um, is kind of how I felt.
Yep.
Um,
Yeah. I feel like
yeah.
without
This
the
is the quote
precision.
that I thought was really cool. He says, "Isn't it better under such conditions to live in willful blindness and enjoy the bliss of ignorance? Well, not if the monster is real."
I swear to
Do
God,
you
that's not a
truly think
lion.
it's a good idea to retreat, to abandon the possibility of arming yourself against a rising sea of troubles, and to thereby diminish yourself in your own eyes? Like, man, like it never goes away.
Right.
I know people that like use like the toll road and like have never paid it. And like
Oh no, I did that.
that's just
Yeah.
there.
I had
Like
like $3,000.
it's just
It
piling
was
up.
horrible.
Yeah.
It was
Like
chaos.
and like the stress of that, just knowing in the back of your head, oh man, I owe them a lot of money. Like,
Yeah,
you
and
know what I
watching
mean?
my
Like,
credit score tank.
I bet, yeah. And like you just can't like you can do it, but it doesn't help you in the short term, and it definitely doesn't help you in the long term.
Right.
Like, and that's what he's saying is like you you just have to face these things.
Yeah.
eh,
And
And it's like the
he's like,
lobsters or whatever. Like as you do, you get better at it.
right. You get more serotonin. You get the surges of serotonin. Like,
lobster surge. Gain another
ooh,
level in crustacean.
is that like a weird new like soft drink?
Lobster surge.
Lobster surge.
Ew. It's like lobster bisque in a can, like carbonated lobster bisque. Hmm. Yeah, but as far as like the like application of precision to eliminate the squirrel dragon, I like how where he talks about how precision specifies, because like if bad things are happening or you have a fear or like an inkling that something could happen, unless you're specific about it or by being specific about it, um, or precise about it rather, you uh, specifically can understand its constituent parts and if it actually is a bad thing, and if it is, then you like by like talking about it, you like admit to the possibility of being able to overcome it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, he says the problem itself must be admitted to as close to the time of its emergence as possible. I'm unhappy is a good start.
Yeah.
Perhaps any reasonable person would be displeased and miserable to be where you are. Alternatively, perhaps you're just whiny and immature. Consider both at least equally probable, as terrible as such consideration might appear.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah,
you're gonna do that at some point. It's just better to choose
Right.
do it on your own terms. You know?
Yeah. I don't know the specific part in here, but he does mention, like as soon as you start to feel something, or maybe in one of the other chapters, but he's like, as soon as you start to feel some like tiny bit of unhappiness, or if you're not okay with something that you've done or someone else has done, like that's the time to like bring it forth and be precise about it and like articulate what it is, break it down, categorize it so your like perception of it is accurate, and then you can like act on that. But if you don't do that, then we get dragons. Like he says, you must speak forthrightly and call forth the habitable world from chaos. You must use honest, precise speech to do that. And I think that if you zoom out a little bit, like that, combined with like some of the other parts of the book, you get this like image of, because early on in the book, I don't remember exactly where, he talks about the three constituents of reality, which is order, chaos, and consciousness, the mediator between them. And in that same chapter, he kind of talked about the optimal mode of existence is somewhere on this like razor edge of chaos and order, with like your constant striving to understand and learn and improve and be like humble as the guiding principles to like not fall into chaos or not cling too much to order, but to constantly improve in your like dance between them. So if you take that and then combine it with this like, or like in addition to the like loftier like mental pursuits that he calls out as part of that process, this is like a really actionable like day to day or like constant tool to like actionably engage with the pursuit of that dance with order and chaos, is to be precise. Because like without the precision you fall into chaos. With the precision you can articulate the chaos and specify where it starts and when it stops and prevent yourself from the fall, but also be capable of like utilizing it.
Yeah,
Mhm.
definitely. Yeah, I mean, I think it's helpful sometimes to really just question, like, why am I doing the things that I'm doing? And like,
Because sometimes the answer is just you're fucking stupid.
yeah, like, or at
I've
least
had that happen.
for me, it's usually just like, well, you're being lazy. Like, you don't want to face the things that are hard for you to face and things like that. And like those things are always still like waiting for you.
Yeah. I think
So
like at the
then I
very
think
end,
just generally like the whole like discipline equals freedom thing kind of comes into this as well.
sure.
Like the more ordered you are and the more disciplined you are, like the better you can face the chaos.
Right.
Yeah, sorry.
No, no, no. I was just
There
gonna
was
say,
this I don't remember where the frickin' quote was from, but there was a quote that said something like, "We do not rise to the level of our hopes; we fall to the level of our discipline." And I think
Mhm.
that like kind of perfectly encapsulates this chapter in terms of like, well, the gist of a lot of his message.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and one of the things that I've been thinking about recently that I got from this chapter that I think I probably need to put some thought into is he talks about how you can't get from point A to point B unless you're already at point A. And if you're just anywhere, the chances are that you're already at point A are very small indeed. That's really interesting. Like, I think a lot of the time we don't really even know where we want to go, which is point B. And so, like, we're probably not at point A either. And I never
Yeah.
really thought about that. Like, that's hard, you know?
I've had to realize that on my own in this chapter about like how I approach
Yeah.
artwork. And
Yeah.
it's made me realize that I needed, and then I read the chapter and I was like, oh, that explains a lot. Yeah, I'm really bad at that.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, your B might have been, I want to be able to do art. And then you realized, oh, I'm not even at A yet. And then you had to make changes.
I meant more for like, I have like an image in my head for a picture, but then like,
Oh.
it's like, okay, well, I'm going to do this. And it's like, well, do you know how to draw that? And it's like, not really.
Yeah.
And then I'm somewhere in the middle and it's just like, but yeah, no,
Yeah.
that,
Yeah. Getting to A can be like the hard part.
or just realizing what A is.
Yeah. It's
I
true.
think that kind of ties back almost in a, not really, but like in its interesting comparison to draw with like the last book we read, Abundance, where we have like these exponential growth curves and they seem like nothing's happening until it like breaks even at zero in terms of its like growth. But once it gets above that, it just seems like massive, crazy breakthroughs and things are happening at like unprecedented speed. But until you get to zero, like it just looks like nothing's happening. Like maybe even just like stagnation. I think that's like very. It at least looks the same, or you know, there's a I don't know, whatever. Just at least looks the same as like same kind of like internal process of like figuring out trajectory and like pathways, like desirable pathways, and then the status on those things, and like where to go from there.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, one of the things that we kind of talked about in that other book was how you can't like try to accomplish something until you know what it is you're trying to accomplish. Like you have to have the idea first, and then you can invent it.
Yeah, well, that's like I think a really
That's
really
pretty
good
much the chapter
delve on
10.
10. Yeah,
Yeah.
and we already covered a lot of 11. Like he just goes into here and basically like deconstructs the social constructionist viewpoints one by one and demonstrates eloquently that like we probably need a lot of things that they're trying to mess up, and talks a lot about the atrocities of the past,
Yeah.
Russia and other communist and socialist countries. Like this was a weird chapter. Like I didn't really highlight anything in this chapter because I mean I highlighted a couple things like at the end, like one thing at the beginning, but most of it was just like I guess if you watch anything he talks about, because these are all like the hot topic issues, you get a lot of this message from the specific chapter in like everything he talks about, like any interview he does and that kind of thing. So it seemed like a lot of like well traveled road that he was just kind of like reiterating on, which is fine, and it was good, and it's the same
Yeah.
message, and I think it holds pretty true.
I think
Um,
it was good. I think that like I think it's good to keep in mind this side of the argument when it comes to like the liberal tendencies to want like it really is like its own kind of like authoritarianism where everything has to be safe, like, and like we're afraid that things are going to happen to kids, and like I feel like there is some pressure to have like to make like just being like a boy and like a young child like rambunctiousness and like all that. Like I think it's something that I think we've moved in a direction that may not be ideal. Like with all the people that supposedly have ADD and like most likely they're just bored in school.
Yeah.
And like I think he's right. I just don't know if they're it's just a hard thing to like talk about. Like I don't really know what there is to do about it other than like just try to let people be
right.
themselves. Like and not be overly controlling to other people. I thought it was interesting the way he said that people that are saying you should have no kids or just one kid or like um there is kind of an anti-human element to some of the like, oh, we're destroying the earth. Um, I think it's good to keep that in mind. Like, I also think that in a lot of ways we are destroying the earth, and I don't think that that's necessarily a good thing. And I don't necessarily think he's saying it is either. But I don't know. This was interesting, but
Yeah,
I
his
don't know.
his diagnosis of the people in this, like what we started talking about before we got into the correct chapter order, like it's so strange how, and I guess like as a psychologist, his insight is deeper and like might be more correct, or at least more correct in the vein that he's aware of about people's like intentions and motivations and like the certain and like ideologies and mindsets that people have to be possessed of to like instigate certain things, like saying the single child thing, and like he's saying that that's like attributable to this like anti-human nihilistic point of view, that like even if the person isn't consciously like expressing like I want to kill people and like the people suck, like he's at least subconsciously thinking that, and you can tell because of what he's saying. And
Right.
yeah,
Yeah, I mean, there is definitely like sort of a controlling. element to our current society that is like trying to push people away from being like the way they naturally are, I think. And like a lot of it I think is good. Like uh you know, I mean a lot of the things that we've stopped doing as a culture, like we I'm glad that we did, you know. But I feel like maybe we're going too far sometimes.
Has science gone too far?
We
90%
didn't
of people
stop to
fail
ask
this
if we
quiz.
should. Instead, we only asked if we could.
But I mean, really, a lot of these things are hard. They're just hard questions.
And I
Like,
think that,
should kids be able to skateboard? Like, I
yeah,
think that they should, but I think that we should have like their own areas for them.
sure.
You know, I don't want to get hit by somebody on a skateboard. Like, I don't know. Like, just maybe that's me being, somewhat conservative and not liking. I don't know. Like, I also think that there should be a place for, like, people to, like, I don't know if this the boys to be boys saying is. I feel like there's a lot of baggage in that, but
Sure.
Yeah, it's been kind of abused, but it's one of those things where it's like you have to let people make mistakes in ways where, like, hmm,
yeah, I mean, I don't think
how
there's
is
anything
it's like what's
wrong.
the best way to say that without excusing what's happening, but also saying because there are definitely things that happen that aren't necessarily good, but they're not bad enough to warrant any type of, you know,
Well, usually they're a lot more complicated
yeah.
than you'd think,
Yeah,
or like than
I
it
think,
seems on the like front. And I think that a lot of these things that are happening, like they are bad, but it's like it's a it's a big issue,
yeah.
you know.
I think you have to look at like time scales, like, and you look at like culture
Yeah.
and like, 15,000 years of like modern culture, and like we're dealing with these issues that are like pretty firmly rooted in like they've always been going on, but they're like iterations. Like we haven't solved like evolutionary tendencies out of our
Right.
species, and like that's indicative that these problems are large, if they're even problems, if we're just not,
Yeah.
aware and in acceptance or peaceful existence with our nature. So, like to me, when I zoom out, like the first thing I think is, wow, like I have not enough knowledge to have an opinion about these things. I'm like, this is great. Like all these things people are freaking out about, and I'm just like, okay, I would need to go to school to learn about these things to be able to come back and have an opinion. And then the second thing I think is like I'm pretty similar to a lot of people in that regard. And so I think that,
Yeah.
you know, you gotta have to me, I like break it up and I'm like, okay, number one, if I just strip away all this outrage, right, then I'm left with like uh, uneducation, and I'm left with like the infancy of the situation. Like even though it's 15,000 years of cultural evolution, the specific like iterations of the problems we're facing are, 5, 10, 50, 100, 200, maybe 400 years old, maybe. But because of like technology and the way things are rapidly changing, a lot of them are, 100 to 50 years old, as far as like these societal issues that he addresses here. And it's like, it's like I think the closest analog that I can wrap my head around it with is like the social media like debacle, like the like almost metastasized like Facebook and like these like bloated information gathering companies. Like we're like 10 15 years, 19 years, whatever, 15 years
Yeah.
into these companies even being around. Like 15 years is nothing. It's like a while for a company to exist, but for a company to exist at the size and capacity that they do for that long is unprecedented. And like
Well,
we're
it
just
makes the
babies.
ability of the human who wants attention, like humans have wanted attention from the people around them for thousands of years. And
I
then
think he's his
suddenly they're able to get it from everyone. All
Yeah, but that's not my point. My point is that
His point
like
is more like it's like the system, the companies don't have like they get so big in such a short period of time. There's no way to really properly judge whether or not like you're dealing if they should be that big, what you're dealing with, how much power they should have.
no, well, I mean that's like the right direction, but what I'm saying is that we just don't know like anything. When people try and make statements, and like I do think that, like we said previously, you have to have these conversations in order to come to like a meaningful conclusion and diagnose an issue if it does exist. But most of the conversations that are being had, because they're grounded in outrage and non like uneducation, are fluff that is very indicative of the infancy of the situation. I think that's applicable from the social media, equally applicable in the social media arena as it is in like the societal, cultural, political arenas, where we're just babies. We're just babies like trying to climb out of a crib. We don't
Yeah,
even know
that's
how
fair,
tall the crib is
honestly.
right now. Like, and we're just like crying and like whining and like hoping someone's gonna come pick us up, and like we're just like having massive growing pains at the same time. Like this shit is not easy. This is like the fundamental constituents of our society that we don't understand, like how they got here because it happened so fast, and like why, and like what it should be, and like that's, you know, a lot of the stuff that Peterson's pointing out is that we're moving so rapidly that we've kind of tripped and stumbled a couple times in a couple different areas, or many different areas, and we've kind of lost a little bit of hindsight, where he talks a lot about culture is constantly on the edge of death, and it's up to, you know, every new generation to go to the past and uncover the gold that the fathers, that their ancestors created, and revivify it with new meaning and new context. And like we're moving so quickly forward, and we've like maybe lost sight of some things that shouldn't have been lost sight of. And I think that's kind of the saliency of his, well, many of his points, is that he's just
Yeah, I mean, I understand what you're saying. I guess I was just pointing out the particular issue with
yeah,
Facebook as I see it. But I feel like that's kind of goes for most of the large societal changes that we've had over the last like 50 to 100 years.
right,
Like they've changed things drastically. And like
yeah,
as people, we it seems normal to us because it's what we've always sort of known.
but the
But
consequences aren't clear.
right. And like a lot of the time, I feel like we've just decided that we do know the exact, or like the right and the left both think they know exactly what is going on. And I think that that's a little bit premature to say that
Yeah, and
we know
like
exactly
I
what's
just
going
wanted to relate that back to what you were saying. Is you're saying that these issues are like complex as fuck. Like every
on.
single one of them is like just infinitely like deep, with like all these like co-constituents and tangents that it's all tied into, and like multivariate like systems. And so yeah, like you take that and you're like, okay, these things are all like infinitely complex, and then you look at people making statements about them, and it's just like, just stop. Like, can we, let's ask questions, you know, let's have
Yeah.
questions and discussions, and then we can come to conclusions, or at least work towards like developing an understanding of the issues.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Yeah, I don't know. Later on this chapter, after he gets done like dismantling people, talks about like the necessity of the like masculine element of consciousness to rescue, well, like in women, the masculine elements of consciousness to rescue, or help develop, like the, I don't know, there's not a good word, like a backbone, or like a strength of character, I guess. And like that's true for men as well. And like we can do that a little bit externally with other people, but mostly it's like an internal use of like intellect and pride, and I forget the whatever, it's like three traits he said, but um, you have to do that, and that's a process, and it's like potentially impeded by like helicopter parents, or what do you say, like the Oedipo mother, or
Mm.
potentially father. And so he doesn't lay it out here because I think he did earlier in the book, but he, that's another, it kind of ties in what we're saying about this like weird place we're in because of like the evolution of culture. And like, you know, it's pretty apparent that we have like many people who like unfortunately had the experience of these, well, I don't know if like as extreme as example he puts out in here, talking about the mother like dooming her son not to mature, blah blah blah. I don't know about that, but definitely there's like elements of that in like much of our the last couple of generations, where you get these humans who are just like not matured, even at like 30 and 40, and they're just like, you know, wallowing around trying to figure out like a direction. And because of the results of this like strange protective happy friendship parenting that's been going on, and yeah, it's disastrous.
I feel like that definitely happens. I feel like I know a fair number of people, or know of a fair number of people that like their parents just like do everything for them, and so they don't do anything.
Sums up the chapter and says, "If you think tough men are dangerous, wait till you can see what weak men are capable of."
I think
What is
the
rule 12?
basically what I like understand about this chapter is, I think what it boils down to is you need to just let people do what they want to do,
Yep.
and like don't
Oh, rule 11? Yeah.
yeah, like don't stop anybody from doing something that they want to do. And I think that goes for like I think if you kind of just follow that, then like it'll just work. Like if women, want to be doctors and they don't want to be engineers, like just okay, like who cares? Let them do it, Like
Yeah.
if they want to be engineers, then let them be engineers too. Like who cares,
Build a new plane, damn it.
Yeah, I think a lot of the time we're like, oh, this stuff isn't fair necessarily, or like women want to be engineers but can't. Like that's a real problem. But like then we have other things like 50% of engineers aren't women. That's a problem, and I just don't know if it is.
Yeah.
And like to me, that just seems like, why are you that worried about it?
Yeah.
So I don't know. And then there's another. I don't know if it's in this chapter or whatever, but I feel like a lot of the time with these issues, like he talks about how a lot of the people that don't like that want like uh the society and like the way money is handled change. It's almost like they don't like the poor. It's not that they like the poor, it's that they don't like the rich.
Yeah.
And I feel like a lot of the time that kind of attitude is
I
going
mean,
on.
I've seen that in myself. Like, I've
Yeah.
definitely,
Yeah.
like, you bring up a lot the phenomena of being in some sort of, or being around some sort of political conversation and getting like swept up in it. And it's like, for me, I've definitely, like, it's very, for people to say, okay, so like back in 2014, I started looking into things in general. I was like, hey, I want more knowledge. Like, I'm going to go start searching. So I started searching and started reading things, and uh, the things that grabbed my eye were, I don't know, like pretty like conspiracy theory ish and like
Mm.
uh, kind of nonsensical. But I kind of got swept up in it, and a lot of the way that the world was described in these like schools of thought is that there's like controlling hierarchies and whatever shadow men, blah 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 blah. Doesn't the context doesn't matter, or content doesn't matter. What I'm saying is, I definitely noticed in myself in hindsight, like it took years, like until the last 3 years for me to be able to look back and be like, well, like wow, like because I was thinking this way, like it I wasn't thinking this way because it necessarily made sense. I was thinking this way because it gave me a platform to stand on that I could speak of, but I'm really speaking about how like I feel my life is unjust, or I feel like marginalized, or I feel like someone has something that I don't and I want it, and this is the reason why. But that's what I'm really saying when I'm talking about, the moon being a hologram, or like monoliths on Mars. I'm really talking about like rich people, and I like want to be them, or like I hate that they have more than I do. And it took
Yeah.
years to be able to look back and be like, wow, like literally that was one of the examples. Like there was I don't know that I ever really subscribed to it, but I definitely talked about it in like serious conversation, the moon being a hologram, with other people. And like, like those conversations, like interesting as that it potentially could be, I guess, as like a fun conversation, like it was seriously like an escape mechanism for my thought patterns to like pander to like perceived injustices,
Hmm.
and I think
Yeah.
that's a lot of the things that
And the
happen.
the interesting thing is like all of those things can still be true, and the solution is still just toughen up, you weasel. You know?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, there's just there's not a whole left after that. He did talk about in an earlier chapter about being careful about giving advice, and about the dude who killed the prostitute or whatever, or wanted to save her and told her how depraved he was and railed at her. But it's like that where you know if you are going to give advice, or if you're going to take advice or listen to advice, like that's pretty much a pretty good directive in every situation. You know, what do I do here? What do I do there? How do I deal with this? You know, how do I deal with this? Step
Yeah.
one, get tough, like do it, start, don't not do it, you know. But that also like applies to activism, which he kind of talks about, and like this kind of nonsensical victim mindset that is kind of trending in our culture, where you know you
Mm.
by doing that you're like removing yourself out of the situation, like by pretending or by maybe it's not pretending, maybe you do believe you're like being an activist is like helping things, and activism is good like in certain situations, but as an act of like victim mindset, um, or as an acting out stemming from that, it it basically removes you from actually being able to impact anything,
Mm.
and
Yeah.
just like invalidates your platform. Like, hey,
I
let's
think
yell
it
about this
also
person.
like puts you in a really like unhealthy and like kind of destructive
Yeah,
way. Like I think one of the like I think it's definitely true uh some of the stuff he's been saying about like men and boys and like what women want and stuff like that. Like I feel like there is kind of like you were talking about how a lot of the people that are finding him resonating are men. Like I feel like there aren't a lot of like I feel like the tendency to let boys grow into like adjusted men is kind of low
yeah,
right now. Like I feel like a lot of the things that like you want from a man or like you would the qualities you would want men to have like are sort of repressed and like he says if they're healthy women don't want boys, they want men. They want someone to contend with, to grapple with. If they're tough, they want someone tougher. If they're smart, they want someone smarter. And I don't think that just goes for women and men. I think that goes for everybody.
yeah,
Like
yeah,
and but I feel like a lot of the time if when someone's trying to be the way that they feel like they should be because it makes them happy and it doesn't hurt anyone else or whatever, like and you say no that's wrong and like you're bad to want that, like I think you get all the weird that's where you get all the weird stuff, like a lot of the like men's rights stuff and the
mm-hmm.
like uh whatever the incel thing is and like all the weird like white knighting
Shibari.
stuff. Like it's just sick. Like it's wrong. Like if you anything you see on those, like you can just tell like it's just not
Yeah, it's
it's
like
not
rotten.
right.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's rotten. Yeah, that's a good word for it. And like I really believe and like we've seen school shootings basically based on this issue. Like or whatever. Like there was that one guy who just like killed a bunch of people that like because he didn't like girls didn't like him and he was gross. Like he was like rich but he was just like a jerk and like it was like because there wasn't anything manly about him. He was like a whiny like boy, you know.
yeah. Like,
And I forget what his name was, but like um it's just gross. And then like what he says at the very end of this chapter is uh no one aiming at moving up would allow him or herself to become possessed by a thing, and if you think tough men are dangerous, wait until you see what weak men are capable of.
right, which
And
is
like
like,
that's so true
yeah,
because like you're not going to see like like biker gangs or something probably have a lot of problems, but they're not going to go fucking shoot up a school because they're not happy with like the way things are, you know what I
sure,
mean?
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Like whereas like whiny boys that society tells can't do anything and like they're bad for wanting stuff and like and it's
yeah.
gross.
Impotent rage is a phrase for a reason. Like
Yeah.
that's it's just like
And it's
you want to make someone do something that you can't imagine, like make them incapable of doing anything,
yeah.
and there you go. Like their shit's gonna hit the fan. Like humans are like powerful and they like do things that you can't imagine, and like the easiest way to make that happen is to just like put them in a box. Like no one wants to be in a box.
Yeah, I mean I honestly think that and then in combination with like what he talks about with the spirit of Cain and stuff, and the school shootings and stuff, like that seems objectively just to be the obvious like cause
Right.
of like 80% of these things. The other ones being like racially or like uh, religiously driven. But even that, like, what sort of mindset do you have to be in
Yeah.
to like?
I really think it
And
all stems
interestingly, we
back
don't
down
see
to those
women doing
things.
this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So like, it seems to be a problem with men.
That's another thing where you look at you zoom out and you look at like the disparity between maybe some of like the diagnosed causes, which like maybe we just haven't diagnosed it yet, and like he's doing
Hmm.
that, and that's cool. But like you look at some of the diagnosed causes of these kinds of behaviors, like if you go ask a psychologist, and you're like, hey, what makes people do these things, and they tell you, like I'm sure that a psychologist, like many of them, could have done that and have been
Well,
able to do that. But then you look at like the conversations that people have about it and
mhm.
the way that people are outraged by it and the way that people react in them because they're not psychologists or they haven't gone and asked a psychologist's opinion and they don't understand the cause. So everyone is in shock. Everyone is like, why are we doing this? And like, or why are they doing this? Why is this happening? And it's like this shocking occurrence when he pretty clearly lays out like a multitude of times that like it is not confusing why people do bad things. Like it is not a mystery why people get depressed and anxious. It's like the real mystery is why people like are happy or like succeed or like don't go shoot people. And it's like
Yeah. For the
the
most part, they're not mentally unstable per
right,
se.
sure,
They're losers.
yeah,
And when you're a loser for long enough, like that will make you mentally unstable.
yeah,
And when there's no way to, you don't see any way to proceed, like you do terrible things. And like we know that. Like it's, if you look at a lot of our like current like media and stories, like there's people like that in Game of Thrones, there's like when you're like when you're backed into a corner and like you don't have any choices and like everything sucks, you're like, well, I'm gonna bring it all down, I
yeah.
guess.
Fuck it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
And
a good
like,
segue.
it makes total sense to me.
Yeah, it's a good segue into the next chapter. He starts off
Yeah.
announcing that it's actually about dogs. I did like that how he tied it together with the cats because I am of the same mind that cats are like a perfect distillation of being. Yeah, and a judge of humans. But that's a good segue on what you were saying because he says that the idea that life is suffering is a tenet in one form or another of every major religious doctrine, as we've already discussed. And he goes on to like elucidate that a little bit, but it's definitely poignant that life is fucking crazy. Like life fucking sucks very often. Like there are many elements of life that we must contend with in order to like eke out like the joy or pleasure or fulfillment that makes it bearable. And
Mhm.
so that statement, and then he goes into kind of talk about, man, I have to say, like I cried like 3 times just reading like the story about his daughter. Like that is so sad. Just like
Yeah.
imagining what it's like to have to like bear that as like a father. Like that's nuts to see your like 6 year old like crumbling. That's crazy. But stuff like that, that's like just a really good example of like the suffering that's intrinsic to life, and whether it doesn't have to be like a sick child, it can just be like that life is suffering and like just day to day things are negatively impactful to your like psychology. Those are also equal manifestations of the suffering of life. And I don't know that like I wouldn't necessarily agree with the word. I don't like the word suffering necessarily. Like it's probably the best word, but I feel like it's like a big word and it like sounds kind of mean and I don't know, scary, which is the point, I guess. I would say there's definitely conflict. There's definitely like friction. Um, Things like that are like equally like insertable into that space, but in each
Yeah.
case, like whatever that thing is, that is like a primary constituent of life, we must like always remember, like we must always remind ourselves that that's the case. Like it is suffering, it is friction constantly, and if we don't allow ourselves like timeouts, which like petting the cat on the street, then we'll be overwhelmed by it. We can't, kind of dominoing together. If you can't be precise and articulate issues as they come up, if you can't allow people to exist in their own space, and then if you can't take time out to like appreciate the lulls in the suffering, then you just have like a recipe for like shit life.
Yeah. 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 Suffering is a interesting word for it, I guess. But I think really it's just like when things you don't want to happen are happening.
Right.
Like I think if you use that as its like weakest definition, then like yeah, that happens all the time.
Yeah.
And I mean, depending on what things have happened in our lives, like it may not seem like we've had that much of it yet, but I mean, it's likely that we will have some at some point, and like, so I think that part of it's definitely right. I think this chapter is just a long way to say that like enjoy the good things when they show up,
Yeah.
and like try to be one of those good things.
Yeah. I like where he
So
talks about like people's limitations, or like systems without limitations, or like he starts by talking about the like a old Jewish story where it's like ask yourself a question like what is God like, and it's like if or imagine a being that's like omniscient, omnipotent, like what is that thing lacking, and the answer is limitations, and it's like everything that's not God has limitations, and like it's not about like fitting into the limitations or doing these things. It's about appreciating them as like intrinsic parts that make up everything. So if you're looking like specifically, if you're looking like at a romantic partner, or like a familial relationship, like the relationship with those people is like foundationally based on the appreciation and acceptance of the limitations of that human, which I thought was interesting because he was using that as a way to talk about like but like if you aren't capable of appreciating and accepting or maybe even admiring someone's limitations, because it's part of the whole of the person, then that's an avenue to introduce chaos and steer yourself away from the opportunities to take times out when cats walk across the street, and like have appreciation for what is.
yeah, yeah. I mean, he kind of talks about how like a lot of the time life can suck, but like you have two options, and one of them for them, one of them is to be just to say that it sucks, and the other one is to just keep trying anyway. And like I think that I don't know, I think it's kind of like I said the other time where like um either it sucks or it doesn't, but the best thing to do is like pretend that it just doesn't, keep doing that.
Yeah.
Like, because if it sucks and you say that it sucks, then it definitely sucks. And like, it's kind of like he says, you're going to either be flirting with suicide or something worse, like a school shooting, something truly monstrous. But then the other thing is like the way that we're wired, which sort of goes back to the lobsters, is when we do overcome these sort of things, like we feel good, and like that's what we want. Like
Right.
we like we
Gotta be a
wouldn't be
monster.
happy if we didn't have these little things to overcome.
Right.
We would be bored, and that kind of goes back to the chaos and the order.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know. I mean, yeah, sometimes you just like draw the unlucky thing of life, I
Shit
guess.
stick.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I'm lucky that nothing like that has happened to me, like, with his daughter and shit. And like, even that could have went a lot worse. And
Yeah.
it does go a lot worse, like every day.
Right.
I thought it was really useful the thing he said about set aside some time to talk about the illness or crisis and how it should be managed
Right.
each day.
Compartmentalize it. Yeah.
But like, don't do it like just do it during that time and then stop. That seems like really good advice.
Yeah, at the end of that, he's like, you know, when the sun's out and the breeze is blowing, you know, you can think about the next 5 years, maybe even think about the rest of your life and plan it out.
Yeah,
As
yeah,
like kind of like little whimsical sentence, but yeah,
yeah. It's true.
I think that, you know, tying into that, he says, being of any reasonable sort appears to require limitation. Perhaps this is because being requires becoming, as well as mere static existence, and to become is to become something more, or at least something different, that is only possible for something limited, which is cool.
Yeah,
Then he got like, it was, I was kind of blown away that he went and like tried to talk about, or didn't try, he like definitely talked about, like, I guess he used Dostoevsky's story to talk about like the existence of quote unquote God and how that's justified by the suffering in the world, and like, or if it is possible to justify that thought process when considering, you know, the injustice or perceived injustice. And he definitely did a pretty good job of laying that out, I feel like. And he's like, you know, these things have to exist. These are the limitations that are imposed to make us grow, like kind of like what you just said. We don't get anywhere, and we actually do better at getting anywhere when we encounter suffering and overcome it. Um, I
yeah,
thought it was really cool. Right after that, he says, something supersedes thinking, despite its truly awesome power. When existence reveals itself as existentially intolerable, thinking collapses on itself. In such situations, in the depths, it's noticing, not thinking, that does the trick. So, like, no matter how much we talk and think about things, like, unless I'm, you know, have my active listening cap on and I'm noticing, like, the currents inside me and like, the currents of this conversation and, like, the, if possible, body language and these things, you know, the whole intersectional web of, like, connectivity that makes this possible and that's, like, active in this situation. If I'm not committed and actively engaged in noticing those nuances, then I'm just like an automata. I'm like a statue, and I'm not. I can't gain anything. I can't notice suffering. I can't figure out the things that need to be overcome. I don't know if I'm suffering, except by some like, you know, subconscious pain or something. So, noticing over thought is a pretty. That's a pretty big thing to think about.
yeah. No, it definitely is.
I mean, it's like it's pretty intuitive. Like, of course, like you can think about things all day long, but unless you're noticing what you're talking about, even like just to yourself, then you really haven't said anything, and you should have just not used that air. Um, the other obvious benefits aside,
Yeah, yeah. I don't know. I think that really what this chapter sort of boils down to me is like, for one, things are not as bad as they could be,
yeah,
and for two, someday they might be, and
yeah,
then three, like, just enjoy it as much as you can, prepare for it as much as you can, and like go at it, I guess.
yeah. This little thing near the end on like the third to 351 summed it up pretty well for me. He said, "That's conscious decision to presume the primary goodness of being as an act of courage. Aim high, like Pinocchio's Geppetto. Wish upon a star, and then act properly in accordance with that aim. Once you're aligned with the heavens, you can concentrate on the day and be careful." It's like, you know,
Yeah. He says people can survive through much pain and loss, but to persevere, they must see the good in being, which definitely seems true. Like, it's kind of amazing the things that people can get through if they just don't give up.
right.
But once you give up, like, you're done.
Hmm. Yeah, you
Yeah.
can see that in all systems, whether it be like a startup, a company, or like a, you know, a
Yeah.
human growing, anything, relationships, anything you engage in, you have to like, I use this little startup like diagram that shows like the peak of novelty and the trough of ineptitude and like but I think that that's like applicable, like it definitely takes work, but
Yeah.
if you don't do any work then you're just like dooming yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. Did you do the Coda thing?
I did. Yeah, that was really interesting. What do you think about
Yeah.
it?
I thought it was good. I mean, I feel like it's good to ask yourself those kind of questions. I feel like it would be something useful to do for me, kind of like what we were talking about a couple chapters ago with the like where do you want to be for B and like where are you for A and like
Hmm.
similar to that. It seems I imagine that this is a lot of what goes into his like future authoring program.
But yeah, it is. I bought it and I haven't filled it out, but I'd look through it.
Yeah, I'd be interested to see what that looks like.
It's
But
pretty simple, but yeah,
yeah, I mean,
I say simple. It's really deep
yeah,
and complex, but it's pretty straightforward, I guess.
trying to find where he starts like saying what,
I thought it was funny
yeah,
where,
like what do I do tomorrow? Like the most good possible in the shortest period of time. Like,
yeah, yeah, yeah. Part of me is like that's super general, but at the same time, that's like the if you're just like paring it down and like what's the ultimate goal? Like, yeah, you're
yeah,
writing with your goddamn pen of light. You should probably be paring it down and getting like the essence of the answer that you intend.
yeah. I mean, all of these just seem pretty powerful.
Yeah.
So I don't know. What shall I do with my life? Aim for paradise and concentrate on today.
Boom.
Like, uh, man.
Yeah.
Yeah, like it's just great.
Yeah. Well, that's an interesting one. It goes back to like being like I don't know, rule two or maybe one. I think it was two, or maybe three. Shit, I don't know. Where he was talking about you have to know who you are. You have to know what you are. You have to know where you're going. You know how you're gonna get there, or not how you're gonna get. You have to know where you're going. You have to like articulate these things and think about them and like be like precise in involving yourself in the act of like imagining them. And because if you don't do that, then you're just like kind of foundering, and you don't have any base to start from, or you don't have a ladder. You have to build your ladder first. And I think that's like an interesting uh, thing to like tie on to the aim at paradise and worry about today, because like you really do have to have some sort of structure. And a lot of what he's talking about with like the religion stuff is utilizing these like ancient thought routines to like build yourself a ladder, a framework that you can climb up in like the evolution of your thought processes and like how those are applied in your life, and thereby increasing your status in life according to your plan of like success.
Yeah, I mean, you know, regardless of any kind of actual afterlife, like the way that you act each day really does like make your life hell or not.
Yeah.
So like, and then everything that you do, or most of the things you do, have to do with other people, and so it's like a rippling effect where
Right.
you make somebody else's life either a little bit better or a little bit worse, and then it just goes from there, and like you get what you've like, I don't know, like reap what you sow sort of thing.
Hmm.
And I think that when you look at a lot of those religious ideas under that kind of scope, it's real interesting.
Right.
And I think he's talked about how most atheists don't live like they're atheists.
Yeah.
They live like they believe in God.
Because like an atheist would be pretty amoral, or like at least something of
Well,
that nature.
yeah, like if you just looked at like like Sam Harris and like those kind of people, like they're some of the most moral like people that a lot of atheists and a lot of like skeptics and stuff like that, like they tend to be very like idealistic in their morals and like more than anybody else, I think.
Yeah.
Like if you just listen to them talk and
I think it's a necessary kind of like after effect of like being like, okay, now I'm an atheist, or like maybe starting out
yeah,
as an atheist. Like you have to, craft your own version that's not an ideology, or maybe like craft your own ideology that supports and gives you a framework for your morals and ethics. Because to not do
yeah,
so, you're going to be alone on an island, or violently staving off people trying to arrest you in modern society. Because like if you
yeah,
don't like we have a like most like Western culture, like America and like North America, is all all our laws and stuff from English common law onwards are based in kind of like a Christian mindset. Like they stem from the rules that were given in that book thing. And so you look at fitting into that society, and that necessitates a moral code, an ethical code, a thought process, day to day that is at least somewhat aligned with that foundational, source material.
Yeah, it's kind of amazing how many of our like basic, like somewhat obvious or seeming ideas today are based on the fact that like everybody's equal, or all men were created equal or whatever.
Yeah.
When like obviously that's not actually true.
Mm-hmm.
Like we've just like decided that that's what it should be like, and like I mean I think that's probably the best way that we know how to do things.
That is
So
really like crazy though. Like he's definitely
really
remarked
interesting.
before that like it's insane. Like it's insane that that's the way we've ended up. We live in this culture based on trust, and like what the fuck? Like we're like contentious, competing, violent, territorial, tribal creatures. We've like ended up with this like entire like almost global society where the foundation of that is trust.
Mm-hmm.
Like what the fuck? Like how do we do that? And it's like this is fragile and beautiful, and like we need to do everything we can to not fuck this up.
Yeah.
I like what he's talking about. Like he says, "What should I do when I ruin my rivers?" He says, "Seek for the living water and let it cleanse the earth." And he's like talking about, what do you say? So maybe this is their best talking about like environmental problems. And he says, perhaps our environmental problems are not best construed technically. Maybe they're best considered psychologically. The more people sort themselves out, the more responsibility they will take for the world around them, and the more problems they will solve. It is better, proverbially, to rule your own spirit than to rule a city. It's easier to subdue an enemy than one within. Maybe the environmental problem is ultimately spiritual. If we put ourselves in order, perhaps we will do the same for the world. And he says, of course. What else would a psychologist think?
Yeah.
He's like, fuck it, let's all hold hands and clean shit up.
But really, like, what else is there to do?
Yeah, I mean, so much of these ideas he puts forth are like just like ultimate distillations. It's like you have an issue. There's like 5 solutions, like ever, and like just pick one and do it. And like,
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean that's pretty much it. Like, and I definitely think that his focus on the individual issue is like the only way to do it. Like it's so hard to do like a sweeping fix for everything. So.
Right, and a lot of like, I mean, that's kind of that whole like systems level and individual level dichotomy, and it's just like the only way to fix that is to fix the people that make up the systems, because those systems are based on the ideas of thousands, millions of people, whatever system you're looking at. So like if you're like, hey, we should change this, the thing shouldn't be just, I mean, like the solution shouldn't be we'll change the system, because what the fuck is a system but a bunch of people? So if you just like have the people change themselves, like number one, it's a lot, I mean, easier from a systems level. Like it's harder to get the system to enforce individual change, but it's much easier to have the individual influence the system that it makes up by having it change.
Yeah, I mean, it would be, I mean, really, like, if you think about it, I can't think of any way to more speedily correct any issue we have in society than have everyone look at themselves and say, I need to make myself better.
Right.
And, like, just focus on that for a day. Or, like,
like an anti-purge, like the opposite of the purge. Everyone just be a fucking saint for a day.
Yeah, I mean, like, if everybody was just focusing on themselves and just trying to make themselves better, and then they realized that the people around them were also trying to make themselves better, like, why wouldn't you help each other?
Yeah. I think that would be like like if you did that for a day, like I think that it would change the world like pretty significantly, or at least demonstrate that it could be changed.
And I mean, yeah, and then you just have to do it the next day, and then you just have to do it the next day, and like, oh, like that's how we do everything.
Oh my god.
I mean, I don't know, like, and when you're trying to make yourself better, you're not trying to make other people worse.
Sure.
Like, because that doesn't actually make you better.
Right. Yeah.
Like,
you realize it's not a competition, it's like a cooperation.
Yeah, like if I want to be good at running, it doesn't make me better if I like break your legs. Like I'm
Unless
just
there's only two of us in the
that's
world.
yeah, but like I still would feel shitty.
Sure.
I still wouldn't be able to outrun a bear or
Right.
whatever.
Yeah.
Like, you know, but most of the I just feel like a lot of the time we're focusing on other people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I mean,
I
it's so
can
much
I
easier
can
because it's so
understand
much
why, because other people are doing
crazy
everything wrong
shit.
too.
Yeah.
But I also don't know, if I've ever had anyone come up to me and tell me that what I'm doing is wrong and been super receptive to that, you know.
Yeah.
But it's really just those times of like introspection when I'm like, man, like I really am doing this wrong and I want to do it better. And like that's when I change.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I think, and then like and then maybe if you're doing something really well, and then other people will find that interesting and like want you to help them, and then maybe you can help them, in a careful way.
Right.
But I don't know. It's kind of like, I guess, like leading by example.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, yeah, and just like the overflow effect, like the net gain of like the system is like based off of the individuals, and so if all the
Yeah.
individuals are like they're collectively gaining essentially, then
And like
it becomes pretty evident.
worst case scenario, nobody else does. Everything goes to hell, but like you're a little bit better than you were before.
Right.
Like there's not a downside to it. I don't know. I don't see any good arguments against this aspect of Jordan Peterson. I think some of his other stuff is a little bit more uh, interesting and perhaps questionable, but I don't know. I'd be interested to see like a intelligent argument that actually takes what he's saying and like has another opinion. And then the cool thing about him, I think, is that I think he would be just as interested in that as well. Like
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
he would want, like if there is science that backs up another like opinion, then I think he'd be interested in that too.
Right.
Most of the time he's just like, man, things are complicated and like I don't think we really know what we're doing. And
Yeah.
that seems hard to argue with.
Right. And I think that's like what I agree most with. Like I was saying, like we're just
Yeah.
like so like infantile in our like approaches and understanding of like mostly everything
Yeah.
at this point, like with our culture, and it's just like who
Yeah.
knows? Like we'll get there, hopefully. That or an
I think
asteroid will
really the
kill
only
us.
thing we can do is like have more conversation and like just understand like, the way people are experiencing things and like things like that.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Stuff's complicated. And usually like our one sentence solutions to problems just can't take everything into account.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know. It's interesting to see like the effect of things like social media and like birth control and like all that shit. But I guess we'll just figure it out one day at a time.
I think that's probably the only way it's gonna get to happen.
No, I've never done anything faster than one day at a time.
Oh my God. My oh.
I'd like to,
Oh.
but I don't know how.
Where's the YouTube speed button adjustment on this thing?
What thing?
Life.
Oh, yeah. Time flies when you're petting cats or something, right?
Oh man.
Oh man. All
If I
right, I'm gonna
pet,
go eat some keto stuff.
yeah, me too. I'm gonna go transcend like 7 dimensions. I'm gonna text you in a little bit and be like, I'm so powerful. Thanks for listening. It's been a blast. To get engaged, head over to sequesteredsuperlative.com and subscribe with your email to get all the latest updates, including new book discussion audio, blog posts, and more. So long until next time.